Hey everybody, Jerry here. Thanks for tuning in to the Eurasian Americans. Today, before we get to our interview with Sheela Lal, I just want to take a moment to highlight another Asian American business person. This one happens to be an artist, and he is none other than Justin Park. If you've listened to our earlier episodes before we switched up the format to the Helper series, Justin's song TLC is the song that we kick off all of our shows with. And I want to highlight Justin because he is an amazing artist and he is a good guy. He belongs to the team at 5A Label, who is led by Peter Hong, another great friend of mine who I've been lucky to know for the last 20 years. You can check out Justin and support him right now at 5alabel.com. You can go buy his music. You can go buy some merch at the shop link on the website at 5alabel.com. Help your musician friends. Tours are canceled, festivals are canceled, and so they're going through a lot. Music people, especially people behind the scenes, are suffering a lot. So let's do what we can, support your musician friends. And so if you got a moment today, head over to 5alabel.com and go buy a Justin Park t-shirt. Now here's our episode with Sheela. Welcome everybody to the Helper series on the Eurasian Americans. Hope you are having a great time at home. And if your family members are there with you, whether they be your kids or your parents, it may be challenging, but let's make the most of it. Today on the show, we want to explore topics of what we can do from our home offices and from our dining tables in a way of reconnecting and connecting with new friends during these times where we are doing our part staying home. So I'm really happy to share this conversation and welcome my friend Sheela to the show. Hi, Sheela.
Hey, Jerry.
Sheela has a great background in actual community organizing in her home state of Missouri through elections, through politics, and she has just a great wealth of knowledge and background. So, Sheela, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where's home? How did you grow up? And what really got you excited about organizing?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me on. For folks who don't know me on this podcast, Jerry and I didn't overlap, but have a lot of mutual friends from both attending the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. So I'm from the Midwest. I'm from mid-Missouri, born and raised, and like I like to say, radicalized and politically. So I grew up in college town, went to public schools, like in a relatively diverse town, especially for the Midwest, and really caught my footing in political action during my sophomore year of high school. It was my first exposure to folks whose parents had been really politically involved and who would take me to things, whether it was a Noam Chomsky speech at the University of Missouri or to my first protest, actually against the Iraq War in 20, I want to say 14, 15. So that was my first taste. And as I started to understand that there was space for younger people in politics, I really started to edge my way into those. Starting in undergrad at the University of Missouri, I worked for a congressional campaign, volunteered for the local Dems chapter, eventually working my way into national policy, working at the Center for American Progress, National Bureau of Asian Research, and interning at the Missouri State House and at then Progress, Missouri. I think that just by having those opportunities available, I really took hold of them. I also found more of a home in political work than in really any other like field, for lack of a better word. I After I graduated from undergrad, I lived abroad for a few years, and it was during that time that I realized what it means to be a a resident who can't be involved and the limitations that really puts on me. I lived in Sri Lanka and India, and in Sri Lanka, it was 5 years after the end of a 30-year civil war, where no one was really politically active, and even to this day continues to not be. And I lived in India during the 2014 elections, which was like a really weird experience as somebody who's politically engaged in the US and obviously Indian American. So I look like I could be politically engaged there, but realized that there's such a divide. And I really missed being engaged in those conversations, especially as they related to economic conversations that are being had by regular people. So after those 2 years abroad, I chose to come back to Missouri to work in policy. My parents were a little confused for a few years, like, what do you do? Like, you have a salary, but like, what do you actually do day to day? And it wasn't until we started going to 2016 candidate fundraisers that my parents realized, oh, the work I do is around networking and bringing different people to a table and to get policy done, and that I had expanded that role beyond just people who are stakeholders in the Missouri political realm, but to actual residents and citizens in mid Missouri and in St. Louis. One of the bigger actions that I took within the Asian American community while living in Missouri was to organize why does state government matter panels for Indian Americans and Chinese American uncles and aunties to help spur that conversation and start engaging folks in meeting them where they're at. I think like I've always just felt much more comfortable in the organizing space because it requires talking to people and getting to know them as opposed to making top down or uninformed decisions, which in my current role kind of is a little disconcerting post MBA. Remained in organizing after leaving graduate school, and I've remained in Michigan, remained in organizing. I'm currently on the board of a new Asian American nonprofit called Rising Voices of Asian American Families, which was developed to create space for Asian American women, non-binary folks, and like just general family structures to to learn how to socially move past the barriers we set for ourselves to create pan Asian American communities and eventually convert those social relationships into political relationships and getting more Asian American women involved in the political process. So yeah, very long-winded story trying to explain as concisely as possible like how I ended up here.
Sheila, I think you bring one of the most unique perspectives, even in my primary circle, because I think the path that you have chosen, in addition to just who you are, a South Asian woman in Missouri who's worked on politics and organizing both here and in Asia, with now a business education that works on the corporate side of things, but still your heart and your passions lie in the community.
Hmm.
I think those bucket all those experiences and your perspective, and most importantly, where your heart is, I think is what we need more of, not just now, ever more
Hmm.
now, given all the fun things that are going on in the world today.
Yeah.
Obviously, not fun, but it's a challenging
Yeah.
time for a lot of people, and it is also a time when, even though we're so connected digitally, we're not used to being home so much.
Yeah.
I've often thought, during these self isolation and social distancing times, thinking, man, what if this was 10 years ago? And then you think about all the technologies that we take for granted today that didn't exist 10 years ago, and then do another 10. In
Yeah.
the year 2000, yeah, people had cell phones, but and the internet was there, but it wasn't widespread. And so I think there are things that we have now become accustomed to, whether you grew up in an era without, and now we have, gotten ourselves used to, or you are part of the younger generation who this is the only world you knew. So let's talk in general before we talk about the three specific efforts that you've done.
Hmm.
Um, how do you translate what you've learned in the physical community organizing and the business of getting people together to the table into a digital sense? What is the mindset that we need to have to make that as successful or as enjoyable as possible?
Yeah, this is something I'm constantly iterating on and thinking about, which is how do you meet somebody where they're at in terms of like physical platforms or internet access, language usage, like or even the modes that they're interested in communicating with you in. And the more I think about that, the more I realize like there's so many more networks that I don't have access to that it's really important to think about the degrees of connections that you have within communities. So when before business school, I realized that my communities were very much mid-Missouri related and then extended a little bit to St. Louis, but that they were all relatively upper middle class with some access to like middle class networks, and not very many touch points into lower income networks. Business school had the potential to completely remove those other networks and just keep me within the upper middle class to wealthy networks, especially when it comes to Asian American organizing, because of the de facto like class privilege or class like bump that happens during an MBA. But through Rising Voices, I've been incredibly intentional about opening my mind up and opening up my actual physical space, like my home or the homes that I go to diversify those networks and diversify those stories that I'm listening to, in order to ensure that how I'm communicating is more than just an echo chamber. Yes, I had the opportunity to physically leave my home at that point and go meet people where they're at, but there's so many different organizations in all these cities and all these geographies that can act as catalysts to diversifying your social and professional network outside of like the socioeconomic status or racial ethnic identifiers that we hold. And I think that's really crucial when we're thinking about like actually organizing.
So, given and things are changing so quickly,
Hmm.
many cities are now short of calling it, a lockdown, shelter in place in some of the biggest cities. And right now, we're talking on Tuesday afternoon, and New York City Mayor De Blasio alluded to the fact that one may be coming to New York City soon, which means
Yeah.
more people, perhaps against their primary wishes, may be forced to stay home.
Yeah.
Um, we talked before we started recording about three specific initiatives that um, one was in place already, and two that have become a little bit more important and meaningful as we begin this new normal of being okay with digital connection replacing actual face-to-face human connection. So share with us about let's start with your book club first.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. So in the summer of 2018, I started Unerased Book Club, which is the only nationwide book club focusing and centering Asian American authors. We had it because of grad school and some burnout, it fizzled out. But now, under Rising Voices, we've started it up again and have actually integrated a virtual hangout option for people who, for whatever reason, and this was established before the coronavirus isolation period, that for any who had no reason, no excuse, like is able to join a virtual hangout. And the point of this book club is one, to highlight that Asian American authors write about so many things and write in so many formats, and our stories are so much more diverse than your brain drain immigration story. That there's so many more like rough edges and nuances in in our community that we should actually have a way to talk about them. I also wanted to create this book club in order to encourage people in different communities to come together. So it's more of a locality based membership. So if you're in St. Louis or if you're in Santa Fe, like you should be able to still meet people who are reading the same books that you're reading and get to know them, and kind of the same model that Rising Voices is in, where we want people to have a different or more diverse set of friends in their cities as opposed to relying on the virtual friendships that can happen across the country. There's something really powerful about rooting your organizing and your even your reading in the city that you're in. So the book club is monthly. We have a national hangout that will be happening at the end of the month. You can check the website for more information on erasedbookclub.com. We change books every month. At the beginning of the month, I send out an email. This is the first time we're going to do a virtual hangout, so I'm not sure how the numbers, what it'll look like, but we have currently like 120 readers across the country, which is pretty cool, and we're hoping to bump that number up a little bit more. So yeah, that's like under with coronavirus now, having a virtual option is so crucial to getting people to stay engaged. There's something really freeing about reading a new book and especially being able to talk about it with people who may have be processing the same types of information, same feelings. And there's something really intangible and beautiful about bonding over a piece of culture or piece of literary work that you can't really replicate with any other cultural medium. I don't think that having it virtually takes away from that. In fact, I think it gives you a reason to get online and chat and kind of be a little bit vulnerable with people you may not know.
Share with me very quickly how your book selection process works and
Yeah.
what you are reading this and next month.
Yeah. This is a I took so much time to think about like how we pick these books, but I read probably about 20 or 25 books. I think about how accessible are they? So, can you easily get them at a public library? Do they have an audiobook format? Do they have an ebook format? Um, or can you buy them from a local bookstore? From there, I think about the balance. Like, are the books orthogonally balanced? Do we have a good mix of representation from throughout the Asian American community? Like, I don't want it to be so heavy on like Chinese American or Indian American authors. I want there to be like a Japanese American, a Filipino American, etc. Like really getting a sense of the broader community. And then I think about the actual medium or the medium of literary work. So is it I want some poetry, some the graphic novels, nonfiction, fiction, young adult fiction. Um, so getting like a good mix there, and then finally, are the questions that come out of these books thought provoking enough to encourage more conversations or deeper conversations? So that is my process. It doesn't, when I think of it that way, if I use that framework, it's actually relatively easy to shortlist my books. I have a list ready to go for 2021 because there's so many really awesome pieces of writing that are coming out of the Asian American author space. But this month, we are reading The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. It's a nonfiction look at how do you plan events or how do you set intentions with any sort of gathering, which is very timely for moving a lot of gatherings
Right.
online. um, but I read that book also in 2018, and it has stuck with me from then on out. It actually influenced the way I think about a lot of other sorts of gatherings and how do you create intention around hanging out with people, even if it's supposedly casual. And then the book for the month after, it's The Buddha in the Attic by Julia Otsuka. It's a really beautiful and heartbreaking multi narrative look at Japanese women coming over from the 1840s through internment. So it's multi perspective. You don't really actually get a sense of who each person is, but you get this collective understanding of the Japanese female experience in the U.S. I read it on the way to Mexico City in 2017 and like was sobbing while reading it. So that should hopefully highlight the different types of books that we're putting out there.
That is amazing. So, for those of you that are listening or have discovered the Eurasian Americans in 2020, it actually started back in 2019 as a Asian Pacific American Heritage Month Instagram series where I highlighted a number of my friends who were doing amazing things without audio, just pictures and a description. And one of my friends who I love and I adore and I respect for all that she's done for the community is Professor Sarah Park Dahlen from the University of St. Catharines in the Twin Cities. And she leads a movement called We Need Diverse Books. And she
Hmm.
is a big proponent of uh, diverse literature across the board and particularly with children's literature. So um, to you and to Sarah for not only highlighting but celebrating and driving up the sales of and encouraging other people to start writing. Just last week we had children's author Helena Khoury. I think it's amazing. So that I think is an amazing. It's a two sort of a birds with one stone because you have community in discussing your book, but also it forces you to keep up with the book,
Yeah.
right? So you are giving yourself two things to do when I know you can't technically run out of things to watch on Netflix, but um, one should limit his or her time. So I think the book club idea is fantastic, and a lot of the themes that you shared in terms of inter-Asian representation mindset and
Hmm.
intention is something that I am very, very thoughtful about in producing this show as well. Um, I know what my biases are. I know where my personal networks are stronger and weaker, even within the Asian American spectrum. So, yeah, it's not easy, but I think every little bit helps, and
Hmm.
I thank you for that.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
let's the second one. I think it's even. I just told people to stop watching Netflix, but we're going to go back to maybe encouraging you to get in front of a screen. Um,
Yeah.
tell me about your your curation of a list of documentaries that you think we should watch during this time.
Yeah, so I'm from Columbia, Missouri, and Columbia has the awesome honor of hosting the premier documentary film festival in the country called True False. And so I've been going to it since high school. So it's been over 15 years. And they put out, so I decided, hey, like there's all these amazing documentaries. A lot of them I know have been picked up by big production houses. Like they also get to premiere the Obama produced documentary. So I'm actually going to go through and I'm going to create a document of, I've only done 3 years. There's plenty more. There's a decade and a half left to go, but of curating all of the films that they have screened at the festival and then cross checking to see if these films are on Amazon, Netflix, or Hulu or Canopy, and just creating a crowdsourced document from there. So I have been sending it to a lot of my friends who have spent significant amounts of times in Missouri and have asked them to spread it widely. And the hope is that for all the joy that True False brings to its participants, that you can kind of recreate that magic of maybe watching a documentary with a friend virtually and then talking about it, being like, hey, I know we saw this like 4 years ago, but I've watched it again and I have new thoughts. So I just did that today, and a lot of the people I've sent it to have been really, really pleased and like happy that it reached their inbox. So if you're interested in looking at it, Jerry, I'll send it to you, and you can put it in the show notes. But it's a pretty simple list. The movies are all incredibly curated by one of my oldest friends, who's a program manager at the festival, and so you really can't go wrong with any of the films on that list.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to highlight, if listeners haven't caught on, there's one thing that you are doing far and above what other book clubs and other list sharers are doing, which is you care about access.
Yes.
You are picking things that are widely available, which is a topic that is becoming more and more important as we talk about health services, as we talk about even testing
Hmm.
of the virus. Drive-through clinics are great, but what if they don't have cars?
Exactly.
Um, having healthcare workers out there in the field are great, but what if they don't speak your language?
Yes.
Um, and so I mean that is something that I am in incredible awe of, Sheila, and I think it's awesome that you are taking that additional step because I don't care if you think the movie is great if people can't watch it in an affordable and accessible
Hmm.
way, it doesn't really matter.
Exactly.
So the first two things are about gathering and sharing the work of other people. The third one I think is amazing, something that I have started to do a little bit more of. So share with us a little bit about your third and final ways to engage or re-engage with your friends during this slow time, or this not slow time, this self time.
Yes. So we all know that you have those friends who say, "Hey, let's catch up sometime," and nothing ever manifests. And I saw on Facebook that a friend from my New American Leaders Network posted a Calendly link and was like, "Hey, if you want to catch up, just like book 30 minutes with me." And I was like, "You know what? I want to do that." So I copied Vanessa, and who is actually a James Beard Fellow this year in Food Studies. So just want to quickly give her a shout out. Um, and uh, and I decided to do the same thing. I posted it yesterday, and I already have 9 30-minute blocks scheduled with people from really different parts of my life. We're just like, yeah, let's hang out. Let's like drink some tea or drink some coffee, or if somebody wants to drink beer, go for it, and we'll just like chat for 30 minutes. And um, for me, it's a really important way of just listening to folks I haven't been able to chat with in a while and help like readjust like the way I think about them, but also the way that I'm understanding their part of our like national narrative. So I'm really looking forward to catching up with people in the next few weeks.
That's awesome. I've done a few of these already. with groups or, with smaller groups that I belong to and just say, hey, whoever's available, come on. I use Calendly to book all my podcast recording sessions. It's a really easy, amazing tool. Neither of us are getting paid to plug it. I just think it's super easy and makes your
Yeah.
life easier.
Yes.
For all the parents out there, something that we have been doing for my 3-year-old and his preschool classmates is to do a virtual breakfast conference call at 8 a.m., which is the time that the kids usually eat breakfast together at preschool. Um, so if it's hilarious and it's cute and it's funny, but even toddlers need human connection at this point too. And thank God that we live in an era where we have the ability to connect as close as we can through audio and video
Hmm.
still, which, again, there might be some listeners who might wonder what life was like before any of this. But, it is something that I don't certainly take for granted. And even the ability, Sheila, now for us to have this conversation, to record it, and then to be
Yeah.
able to put it on platforms that if I look at my, where the people are listening to the podcast from, it's quite interesting and amazing. And, as it grows, I think it will be more fun to see where people are listening from. Ah, man, I think what you're doing is amazing. And it's one person making one thing, right? So in a world of never ending media blitzes and whatnot, and celebrities getting a, wait, I don't want to say undeserved, but an over-index share of media attention for some of the
Yeah.
good that they may be doing.
Yeah.
I really wanted to bring you on as human to human. I know that behind the scenes, you are really making a difference, and we thank you for that. I think it's needed, not just now, but going forward. So thanks for being you, Sheila.
Oh, thanks, Jerry. And I really appreciate the work you're doing with the podcast and creating another way for Asian Americans and non Asian Americans to understand that we have multiple layers and multiple existences. Like, it means a lot.
Yeah, if you're not an Asian American and you're listening to this, extra kudos, man. You might be married to one or parent of one or however you ended up here. Thank you. It's especially trying time for many of us as we go through some nonsense and stupid behavior that is unfortunately directed to us
Hmm.
in some hateful ways. But glad you're here, whoever you are and wherever you may be listening from. So Sheila, the name of the show is The Eurasian Americans. It is inspired in the form of a letter to us and from us to share more of our stories, to celebrate, support, inspire. And so I would love for you to help us close out the show by narrating or speaking a letter to us. So I will start and help us finish.
Okay.
Dear Asian Americans,
In order for other people to understand your story, you have to understand theirs as well. The only way to self liberation is collective liberation. I hope you take this leap with us.
say more about that last part,
Yeah.
the liberation part.
Yeah. I find that there are a lot of conversations about like siloed off Asian American experiences. Like for right now, like for instance, right now with the coronavirus, there's a lot of racism targeting not the Southeast and East Asian Americans. South Asian Americans are not being as targeted, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't stand in solidarity. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't stand in solidarity with Black folks who are at the brute end of systemic racism. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't stand in solidarity with Indigenous folks who've been oppressed since, colonizers got here. And all of that requires us to unlearn the stereotypes that we hold of other communities. My favorite way to do that is by reading and actually watching movies or TV shows that center positively those folks from those communities. And yeah, that's those are really strong ways to help build community in intangibles.
Thank you. It is a theme of the show. We need to be here for each other, even though our experiences and our stories may not completely overlap, even though you may not resonate completely with Sheila's story. Every one of our stories has common themes that we can all relate to. And whether you're Asian American or not, once we start to peel back every single layer that we have identified ourselves with, we are human, every single one of us. And that's the strongest tie that right now in the face of this insane and unforeseen crisis that should be bringing us together. If you see violence out there, say something, do something. If you see racism on Facebook, do something. Be bold. Call them out. This is not, unfortunately, it is not a time to not say anything because you're afraid to offend the offender
Hmm.
or to save relationships that maybe shouldn't be saved. I know that I have a strong opinion on this, but I don't think things are going to get much easier until they get a little bit more worse, unfortunately. And when we look back during this time in history, years and years from now, it will be telling who was on the right side of history. And this is not anything to do with me or anybody else being on the right side of history and saying, I told you so, but listen to the experts, but also have a heart, be a human being, call it out. Everybody's going through something. There's not a single person in the universe who hasn't or who will not get personally impacted by what's going on. So um, I encourage you to do what is right by us and what feels right in your heart. Sheila, thank you again so much for providing an amazing example of how we can all meet people where they are, meet people how they want to be met, in sharing books, documentaries that highlight amazing other people's stories, and for showing us and suggesting ways that we can reconnect with some lost friends.
Yeah,
Um,
of course.
I wish you, yeah, I wish you and your family much health and much safety as we go through this thing together. And yeah, until the day that we can all see each other and hang out and have a beer at Skeeps.
Yeah.
And that is a fun reference for all of our fellow Michigan friends. It is, we'll get through this together. And yeah, so I will put all the links to the book club and the documentary list and how you can connect with Sheila if you would like to connect with her and sign up for a virtual coffee date with her. Um, so, Sheila, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jerry. And thank you, listeners.
Thank you. Hey, everybody, I really hope you enjoyed my story with Sheila. She's an amazing human being that I think inspires so many of us. And I think it's pretty cool. I don't know. Um, I think sometimes MBAs or business school grads get a bad rep for being super robotic business people, and then sometimes you meet somebody like Sheila who is debunking those myths and showing us that at the core of it all, we really do care about each other. So I want to thank Sheila again for joining us on the show. If her story resonated with you, if you know somebody in your life right now, if somebody's name, face popped up into your head as we were talking about the book club, the documentaries, or a one-to-one connection, please share this episode with them. Let them know about the show. This is for lack of a better term, this podcast is just a Jerry show right now. We are growing organically. We're not spending any money to try to buy listeners or anything. And it starts with those of you listening and then really sharing it out to the people that you think want to listen to this. So from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for investing precious time that you have right now in listening to our story. And I will ask you one more help, or I will ask for one more bit of help and share this episode and share our show with us if you think that will provide value to somebody else in your life. Um, Follow us on Instagram and on Facebook at the Eurasian Americans. You can hit me up if you want to come on the show or if you know somebody in your life whose story needs to be celebrated. Be safe out there, everybody. Stay home, and I will see you next time.